At my engagement party, my parents surprised me by saying, "We're giving your childhood home to your sister. You can't handle the family legacy." But when they saw the mansion I had built next door, "The legacy estate belongs to your sister now," my father announced, his voice cutting through the champagne-filled celebration of my engagement party. "You've never shown the proper respect for family traditions, Emma. Sarah has earned this." My name is Emma Collins, and at 32, I watched my parents give away my childhood home. The house I'd spent years secretly preparing to restore to my younger sister who had never spent more than a summer there. The crystal flue in my hand trembled slightly, but I maintained my composure, much to my father's visible disappointment. He had expected tears, protests, maybe even a scene. Instead, he got a small smile. "I see," I said quietly, meeting his gaze, "and he chose my engagement party to make this announcement." Sarah, my 26-year-old sister, stood beside our parents, practically glowing with triumph. She had always been their perfect daughter, the one who followed their carefully planned path through law school, joined our father's firm, and never questioned their decisions. I, on the other hand, had chosen architecture and urban development, building my own company from scratch despite their disapproval. While we thought, since everyone's here, my mother trailed off, at least having the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. My fiancé, James, squeezed my hand supportively, but remained silent. He knew what was coming. "Everyone's here," I repeated, letting out a small laugh. "Everyone's here to celebrate my engagement, and you thought it was the perfect time to announce you're giving away my childhood home. The home Mom promised would be mine when I turned 35. That was before you abandoned the family business," my father countered. "Before you decided your little construction projects were more important than legacy." Little construction projects. That's what he called my multi-million-dollar development company. I had spent the last decade building it from nothing while quietly acquiring every piece of property surrounding the legacy estate, property my parents had been too short-sighted to purchase when prices were low. "The house needs someone who understands tradition," Sarah chimed in, her voice dripping with condescension. "Someone who'll maintain it properly, not turn it into one of your modern monstrosities." I took a slow sip of champagne, thinking about the blueprints hidden in my office, the permits already approved, the historical preservation committee I had been working with for the past 3 years. "You're right," I said finally. "The legacy estate deserves someone who truly appreciates its value." My mother's eyes narrowed at my calm acceptance. In the past, I would have argued, pleaded my case, tried to make them understand, but I had learned long ago that trying to earn their approval was pointless. Instead, I had poured my energy into building something they couldn't ignore or dismiss. "I'm glad you understand," my father said, though his tone suggested he had been hoping for more resistance. "Sarah will take possession next month. We expect you to have any remaining personal items removed by then." I nodded, then turned to address our guests, raising my glass. "Thank you all for coming tonight. James and I are so grateful to have you here celebrating with us. And now I have an announcement of my own to make." My father's face darkened. This wasn't part of his script. "James and I won't be moving into the city apartment as planned." I continued watching my parents' expressions carefully. "Instead, we'll be living in our new home. The mansion I've spent the last 3 years building. It's right next door to the legacy estate." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's smug smile faltered as she processed my words. My father's face reddened as he realized what I had done, what he had failed to notice happening right under his nose. "That's impossible," he sputtered. "All the land around the estate is mine. I finished for him. Every acre. I bought it all while you were too busy doubting my business acumen to notice. The permits are approved, construction is nearly complete, and a historical preservation committee is thrilled with my plans to restore not just one historic property, but to create an entire heritage district." My mother sank into a nearby chair, her social mask cracking. "You can't be serious." "Oh, but I am," I replied, pulling out my phone and bringing up the renderings. "Would you like to see?" The new mansion is actually built using architectural elements inspired by the legacy estate. We're calling it the Collins Heritage Project. It's already been featured in several design magazines. The guests gathered around as I show the images, the sweeping driveways, the carefully preserved trees, the modern mansion that complemented rather than overshadowed its historic neighbor. Every detail had been planned to create something that honored the past while embracing the future. Sarah pushed forward, her face flushed with anger. "This is just spite. You're trying to overshadow my gift." I turned to her, keeping my voice level. "No, Sarah, this is business and passion and vision. 3 things you and our parents never understood about me. The legacy estate is yours now. Congratulations. I truly hope you maintain it well because it's going to be a centerpiece of the Heritage Walking Tours starting next spring." "Walking tours?" my father choked out. "Of course," I said. "The Collins Heritage Project includes plans for historical tourism, educational programs, and community events. The legacy estate's participation would be wonderful, but not essential. I've already secured partnerships with other historical properties in the area. James wrapped his arm around my waist, pride evident in his expression. He had been my rock through all of this, understanding why I had kept my plans quiet until the right moment. My parents had always underestimated me, seeing only what they wanted to see, but now they were seeing the truth, the empire I had built while they were busy doubting me. "You've been planning this for years," my mother said softly, realization dawning in her eyes. "Yes," I admitted. "Ever since you first suggested I wasn't capable of preserving our family's legacy, I decided to build my own instead." The engagement party ended shortly after my announcement, having thoroughly disrupted my parents' planned power play. As the guests left, many quietly congratulated me, some even expressing interest in investing in future projects. My parents and Sarah departed without another word, but I knew this wasn't over. Standing on the balcony of my office later that night, I looked out over the construction site where my new home was taking shape. The legacy estate was visible just beyond its familiar silhouette, a reminder of everything I fought to achieve. "Are you okay?" James asked, joining me with 2 glasses of wine. I took one, leaning into his embrace. "I'm better than okay." For the first time, they saw me, really saw me, not as their disappointing daughter, but as someone who built something meaningful. "They should have seen that all along," he said. "Maybe," I replied. "But if they had, I might not have pushed myself to create all this." Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest motivation. The lights of my nearly completed mansion twinkled in the darkness, a testament to years of careful planning and hard work. Tomorrow would bring challenges dealing with my family's reaction, finalizing construction details, preparing for the Heritage Project launch. But tonight, I savored the satisfaction of finally revealing my vision. The legacy estate might belong to Sarah now, but I had built something bigger than a single house. I had created a legacy of my own, one that would benefit not just my family, but the entire community, and that was worth more than any inheritance my parents could give or take away. 3 weeks after the engagement party, I stood in my office reviewing the final construction details when my assistant announced an unexpected visitor, my father. Through the glass walls, I could see him standing in the reception area, looking uncomfortable and out of place among the modern decor. "Send him in," I said, straightening my shoulders. I've been expecting this visit, though I was surprised it had taken him this long. "Emma," he said stiffly, entering my office. His eyes darted around, taking in the awards lining the walls, the architectural models displayed on sleek shelves, and the commanding view of both his precious legacy estate and my nearly completed mansion. "Dad," I replied, gesturing to a chair, "what brings you to my little construction project?" He flinched at having his words thrown back at him, but sat down. "The Historical Preservation Committee contacted me yesterday. Something about scheduled tours and educational programs." "Yes," I said, pulling up the presentations on my large screen. "We're launching the Heritage District Initiative next month. Several historical properties in the area have already signed on. The legacy estate would be a wonderful addition, but as I said at the party, it's not essential." "You're trying to force our hand," he accused. I shook my head, turning to face him fully. "No, Dad. I'm running a business, one that happens to align with preserving local history, something you've always claimed to care about. By building a modern mansion next door, by creating a comprehensive development plan that honors the past while embracing the future," I corrected, showing him the detailed renderings. "See how the new construction complements the historical architecture? We've incorporated elements from all the original estates in the area, creating a cohesive neighborhood identity." Despite himself, my father leaned forward, his developer's eye catching the details I'd so carefully planned. "These materials, they're authentic to the period." "Yes, I spent 2 years sourcing them." The stonework alone, I stopped seeing something shift in his expression. "But you didn't come here to discuss construction details." He sat back, running a hand through his silver hair. "Sarah's having second thoughts about the estate, is she?" I kept my voice neutral, though inside, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. "That's unfortunate. The maintenance costs are higher than she expected," he admitted. "And with the Heritage District plans, the property value will increase significantly." I finished. "But so will the responsibilities. Historical property management isn't for everyone." My father's jaw tightened. "You knew this would happen." I knew Sarah had never shown any interest in historical preservation beyond using the estate for social media photos, I said calmly. "Just like I knew the property taxes would increase once the Heritage District was approved. It's all in the development plans, which have been public record for months." A knock at my door interrupted us. James entered carrying a tablet. "Sorry to interrupt, but the Historical Society is here for the site tour." He paused, seeing my father. "I can reschedule." "No need," I said, standing. "Dad was just leaving." My father stood slowly, his expression conflicted. "The Historical Society. They're very excited about the educational potential of the Heritage District," I explained. We're discussing partnerships with local schools and universities. Your mother mentioned you've been working with her women's charity group too, he said quietly. Yes. We're establishing a scholarship program for students interested in historical preservation and urban development. Mom seemed quite interested when we discussed it last week. This was clearly news to him. You met with your mother. She reached out after seeing the project featured in the local paper. I didn't add that she'd also apologized in her own way for the engagement party debacle. Some things were better left unsaid. James cleared his throat. The contractor also needs your approval on the ballroom restoration plans. My father's eyes widened. Ballroom? For the cultural center, I explained. It's being modeled after the original Legacy Estate ballroom. Actually, I always loved that room as a child. Something like regret flickered across my father's face. You used to hide in there during parties, sketching in your notebook. Design concepts mostly, I said softly. Ideas for how to preserve the beauty while making it functional for modern use. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words. Finally, my father moved toward the door, then paused. Your mother's charity gala next month, will the new ballroom be ready by then? I exchanged a glance with James before responding. It could be the space was designed to host exactly that kind of event. I'll tell her to call you, he said, and left before I could respond. James waited until the elevator doors closed behind my father before speaking. That was interesting. Indeed, I murmured, watching through the window as my father stood outside, staring up at the mansion taking shape next door to his beloved estate. Have Sarah's financial records come in? James handed me the tablet. Just as you predicted, she's already looking to take out loans against the property. I nodded, unsurprised. Sarah had always lived beyond her means, counting on our parents to bail her out, but the estate's maintenance costs would quickly overwhelm her, especially with the new Heritage District regulations. Should we move up the timeline? James asked. No, I replied, setting down the tablet. Everything's proceeding exactly as planned. Sarah will come to her own conclusions about the estate, and when she does, you'll be ready. We'll be ready, I corrected, taking his hand. None of this would have been possible without you believing in my vision. He squeezed my hand. Speaking of which, wait until you see the latest updates to the ballroom. We found some original molding patterns in the archives. As James showed me the restoration details, I thought about my father's visit. He'd come expecting to find fault to prove his decision to give Sarah the estate had been right. Instead, he found evidence of everything he'd refused to see over the years. My dedication, my capability, my respect for our family's history. The Heritage District would succeed whether the Legacy Estate participated or not. But watching my father realize that I created something bigger than he had imagined, something that would enhance rather than diminish his precious legacy, was more satisfying than any revenge could have been. Let Sarah struggle with the estate's demands. Let my parents grapple with their choices. I had built my own legacy, one that would outlast their doubts and validate every dream they dismissed. The Historical Society members were gathering in the lobby. It was time to show them how the past and future could coexist beautifully, each making the other stronger. After all, that was what true legacy was about, not clinging to tradition, but building on it to create something even more meaningful. The grand opening of the Collins Heritage Project was scheduled for the same day Sarah officially moved into the Legacy Estate. I watched from my office as movers carried her designer furniture up the historic home steps, already imagining how out of place her ultramodern pieces would look against the carefully preserved Victorian details. The irony, James commented, joining me at the window. They gave her the estate because they thought you'd modernize it too much. And now she's doing exactly what they feared I would. I reply, checking my watch. How long until the Heritage Commission arrives for the inspection? 2 hours. Can she knows? I smiled. She will soon. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Why is some historical committee person here talking about regulations and period-appropriate furnishings? I didn't respond. Instead, I gathered my files and headed downstairs where the project team was assembling for our final walkthrough. The new mansion gleamed in the morning sun, its architectural elements perfectly complementing the Legacy Estate while establishing its own distinct character. Miss Collins, our head preservationist, called out, waving a folder. The Historical Society Board is thrilled with the educational center plans. They're already booking school tours for next month. Excellent, I replied. And the community engagement programs, local universities want to partner for architecture and preservation studies. Your restoration work is already being cited as a model for Heritage District development. A commotion from next door interrupted us. Sarah stood on the estate's front steps, her face flushed with anger as the Heritage Commission representative explained something to her. Even from this distance, I could read her body language, the defensive posture, the crossed arms, the impatient foot-tapping. Emma, she shouted, spotting me. Did you do this? Did you set these people on me? I excused myself from my team and walked to the property line. The Heritage Commission oversees all historical properties in the district, Sarah. As the estate's owner, you'll need to comply with preservation guidelines. These guidelines are ridiculous, she exploded. They're saying I can't update the kitchen with modern appliances or replace the old windows with energy-efficient ones. They won't even let me paint. Actually, I corrected gently, you can do all those things. You just need to follow historical preservation protocols. I have a list of approved contractors who specialize in period-appropriate modernization. Sarah's eyes narrowed. You planned this. You knew I'd get stuck with all these restrictions. I planned a heritage district that would protect and celebrate our local history, I said firmly. The Legacy Estate's participation is voluntary, of course, though opting out might affect property values. The Heritage Commissioner nodded. Significantly, properties within designated historical districts typically see a 20 to 30% increase in value provided they maintain preservation standards. Sarah's face paled, but the maintenance costs are tax-deductible under the Heritage Preservation Act. I finished. I have all the paperwork in my office if you'd like to review it. Before she could respond, a familiar car pulled into the estate's driveway. Our parents emerged looking tense. What's going on? Our father demanded. Sarah called saying something about not being allowed to renovate. Just reviewing Heritage District guidelines, I explained calmly. Standard procedure for historical properties. The commissioner seized the opportunity to launch into a detailed explanation of preservation requirements, historic tax credits, and maintenance standards. I watched my father's expression shift from annoyance to concern as the financial implications became clear. And all these regulations apply because we're part of the Heritage District? He asked. The Legacy Estate is a cornerstone property, the commissioner confirmed enthusiastically. Its historical significance makes it subject to the highest preservation standards. Though your daughter's restoration work next door provides an excellent model for modern integration. My father turned to me, understanding dawning in his eyes. You've already implemented all these requirements in the new mansion. Of course, I said. We spent 3 years ensuring every detail met or exceeded preservation guidelines while incorporating modern amenities. It's actually more cost-effective in the long run. Sarah made a choked sound. Cost-effective? Do you know how much these preservation contractors charge? I do, I replied. I also know how to navigate the grant programs and tax incentives that offset those costs. It's all part of the Heritage District Management Plan. Our mother, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. The plan you tried to tell us about 2 years ago. The one we dismissed as unrealistic. The silence that followed was heavy with recognition. They were finally seeing the full scope of what I created, not just a single restored mansion, but an entire heritage preservation system that would shape the neighborhood's future. Perhaps, our father said slowly, we should discuss this further as a family. I checked my watch. I have the project opening in an hour followed by meetings with the Historical Society and Preservation Board, but I'm free tomorrow morning. The opening? Our mother echoed. Yes, of course. The one featured in this month's Architectural Digest, ***, among others, James confirmed joining us. The Heritage District Initiative has attracted national attention. Emma's being honored by the State Preservation Society next month. Sarah slumped against the estate's ornate railing. I can't do this, she whispered. I can't maintain all these standards, manage the regulations. No one expects you to become a preservation expert overnight, I said, softening my tone. There are professionals who handle these things, the same ones you work with. Our father asked. I nodded. They're the best in the field, though their waiting list is getting rather long with all the Heritage District properties requiring services. The commissioner excused himself, leaving us in another loaded silence. The contrast between the properties was stark. My carefully restored mansion humming with purposeful activity, while the Legacy Estate loomed behind Sarah like a beautiful but demanding responsibility she wasn't prepared to handle. The charity gala, our mother said suddenly. It's in 3 weeks. The estate's ballroom needs extensive work to meet code requirements for public events. The Cultural Center's ballroom will be ready, I offered. State-of-the-art facilities, fully compliant with both modern regulations and preservation standards. Sarah pushed away from the railing. Take it, she said, her voice tight. The estate, you clearly know how to manage it. I'll find somewhere else to live. Sarah, our father started, but she cut him off. Now, Dad, we all know this was a mistake and was the one who actually cares about preserving the estate's history. I just wanted, she trailed off, to prove something. I suggested gently. Trust me, I understand that feeling. Our parents exchanged glances, decades of assumptions and mistakes hanging between us. The sound of approaching cars drew our attention. The first journalist arriving for the project opening. We should talk, our father said. Really talk about everything. I nodded. Tomorrow morning, my office. Bring your lawyers. We'll need to discuss transferring the estate properly this time. As they left to deal with Sarah's impending move, I watched the media setting up their cameras with the estate in my mansion as the backdrop. The Heritage District story was bigger than family drama. It was about preserving history while building toward the future. "Ready?" James asked, squeezing my hand. I took one last look at the legacy estate, remembering all the dreams I've sketched in its ballroom. More than ready. It's time to show everyone what legacy really means. 1 month after Sarah relinquished the legacy estate, I stood in its restored ballroom watching my mother's charity gala unfold. The space globe with carefully preserved Victorian chandeliers, their light reflecting off the meticulously refinished hardwood floors. Through the tall windows, my newly completed mansion was visible, both properties now working in harmony as centerpieces of the thriving Heritage District. "It's exactly how I imagined it," my mother said, joining me by the window. "Though I suspect you imagined it long before any of us. I used to sit in here as a child," I replied, drawing pictures of how the estate could be preserved while growing into something more. "I just never thought it would take losing it to make that happen." She touched my arm gently. "We were wrong, Emma, your father and I. We were so focused on maintaining tradition that we couldn't see. We're trying to enhance it, not destroy it." Across the room, my father was leading a group of Impress board members on a tour, proudly explaining the historical significance of various architectural features, details I painstakingly researched and restored. "The Heritage Education Center opens next week," I said. "We're already booked solid with school tours and university programs for the next 6 months. And Sarah? She's doing well in her new condo downtown. Actually seems relieved to be free of the responsibility. We had coffee last week, talked about her maybe joining the Heritage District's community outreach program." My mother raised an eyebrow. "Really? She has excellent social media skills." I shrugged. "The Historical Society could use help promoting their events to younger audiences." James appeared with champagne, handing us each a glass. "The Preservation Board chairman wants to discuss expanding the Heritage District concept to other neighborhoods." "Of course he does," my father said, joining our group. "The property values in this area have increased 30% since the project launched. Every developer in the city is trying to replicate your model, Emma. It's not about the money I started," but he held up a hand. "I know that now. It's about creating something meaningful, something that honors the past while building toward the future." He smiled slightly. "Something I should have understood when you first tried to explain it to me years ago." A string quartet began playing from the restored musician's alcove, another architectural feature I discovered during renovation. Couples moved onto the dance floor, their modern evening wear creating an interesting contrast against the Victorian backdrop. "Your mother and I have been discussing the future of the Collins family properties," my father said carefully. "All of them, not just the estate." I waited, sensing there was more. "We'd like you to oversee everything," he continued. "The estate, the Heritage District, future developments, all of it. Not because you're our daughter, but because you've proven you understand how to preserve and grow our legacy better than anyone, including you." I couldn't help asking. He actually laughed. "Especially me. I would have modernized this place years ago, destroyed half its historical value without realizing it." James squeezed my hand supportively as I considered their offer. "I have conditions," I said finally. "Of course, you do." My mother smiled. "You always have a plan. The estate and my mansion will remain part of the Heritage District, permanently protected by preservation covenants. The educational programs continue, and we establish a foundation to help other historical properties implement similar preservation initiatives." "Already drafted the paperwork," my father admitted, pulling an envelope from his jacket. "Your lawyer helped." I blinked in surprise. "You went to Mr. Harrison." "We've learned to consult experts," my mother said dryly, "especially ones who've proven smarter than us." Looking around the ballroom, I saw my childhood dreams made reality. The estate wasn't just a preserved relic or a status symbol. It was a living piece of history, teaching new generations while growing into its next chapter. "There's one more thing," James said, nodding toward the doors. They opened to reveal Sarah, looking uncertain but determined. She carried a familiar leather-bound sketchbook, my old childhood notebook full of drawings and plans for the estate. "Found this one moving out," she said, holding it out to me. "Thought you might want it back, though you've already made those dreams come true." I took the notebook, remembering hours spent hiding in corners, sketching visions everyone had dismissed. "Maybe not all of them yet," I said. "The Heritage District still has room to grow. Could use someone who understands social media marketing." A smile tugged at her lips. "The Historical Society Board approved my proposal this morning. Apparently, my sister's recommendation carries a lot of weight around here." "Imagine that," our father murmured. The court had shifted to a new song, an old waltz that used to play at every family event in this ballroom. James held out his hand. "May I have this dance?" As we moved across the floor, I caught glimpses of my family watching proudly, Not because I had won back the estate, but because I had transformed it into something greater than they had imagined. The legacy estate was no longer just a symbol of the past. It was a bridge to the future, proof that preservation and progress could coexist beautifully. Happy? James asked softly. I looked around at the restored ballroom through the windows at my mansion next door and beyond to the thriving heritage district that had grown from my childhood dreams. More than happy, I replied. I'm home. The music swelled, the chandelier sparkled, and the legacy estate pulsed with new life, not just preserved, but reborn. Sometimes I realize losing something is the only way to transform it into everything it was meant to be.